We're spending 2 days in Dali to see if this is the most beautiful city in China. Let's go! After 2 beautiful days spent in Kunming, the main city in Yunnan province, we had 3 hours over drive to Dali. And naturally, our bellies were empty and hungry from the drive, so the first stop is lunch. And I did not expect it to be in such a beautiful palace-looking restaurant, but like I said in my first video in China, the restaurants are grander and more spacious than I probably would have ever expected. And we are here for some Dali specialties. From more fried goat's milk, to local fish soups, to fried pig skin, to ham hock tofu soup, to little buns with bee pollen in them. And there were 4 of us, but it was virtually impossible to finish all of this food. And I will say something about Chinese culture is that leaving food at the end of the meal is not only okay, but actually more respectable, to show that the food that people ordered and the restaurant offered was so good, but so much that you couldn't even finish it and you were so full it was yummy. And with the overarching question of, is Dali the most beautiful city in China? Well, the hotel we're about to go to is definitely helping us towards that, because this was a beauty at the top of a mountain. It was a cloudy day, so you can't see the full extent of the view, but either way, I was taking it in. You can kind of see the lake a little bit that we're going to visit later on. And this hotel essentially are little Japanese, like, cabins, I'll call them, but cabin probably doesn't do the word justice. Maybe I'll call them tiny villas, but basically you have to get transported by trolley to your individual little villa, and inside was a minimalistic Japanese masterpiece. So beautiful. I will say the Japanese architecture is definitely interesting, and it was unexpected for me given that we are actually in China, of course, but still so beautiful. And I felt like I was in Architectural Digest, like something just truly out of a magazine, and I couldn't believe that my mom and I were getting to stay in such a beautiful place like this. And of course, you cannot forget the shining gem, the fact that we all actually get to see this view as well, privately from our rooms. This was going to be a rainy trip, so unfortunately we weren't able to take as much advantage of the little terrace that we had, but I made sure each morning to go and smell that fresh air. Okay, I was so mesmerized by the hotel, but this is not the time to sit on our butts. We've got a new city to explore, and we are starting off in a very iconic place with the 3 pagodas of Dali. So the 3 pagodas are the most iconic Buddhist towers in the city, and essentially probably the most prominent visual representation of the city. So if you think of Dali, you'll think of this tower, and man, what a view. So basically these pagodas, there are 3 of them, hence the name. They form a symmetrical triangle. There's 1 large central pagoda and then 2 smaller ones on the side. I don't know if you can notice a little bit, but they do seem like they're leaning ever so slightly, like Leaning Tower of Pisa style. The pagodas themselves basically symbolize the Buddhist heritage of Dali and the historical prominence of Buddhism in this area. I feel like I visited other parts of China where Buddhism was definitely not nearly as prominent, so it was just a major cultural learning experience for me. And it was thought that the pagodas were built for auspicious good luck reasons, meant to protect the area from natural disasters like floods and earthquakes. But the pagodas are not the only thing in this area. There's actually the former Changshan temple, which was once the royal temple of the Dali kingdom. And I feel like knowing that this was a kingdom, you know, anyone that loves history, you've got to have a little bit of an active imagination. So I like to imagine 1,000 years ago in the Tang Dynasty when this was all active and thriving, and just imagine what it was like to be here, like a literal king or queen. And here we were going through each of the different temples, and I actually learned a lot about Buddhism practices. For example, you know, there is a middle path with different markings and etchings, and in order to kind of collect the good luck as you walk along, you walk on the middle of the path. But also things like going into the temple, you actually shouldn't be recording or filming. So the content creator in me was only filming outside, but now you know when you visit and you want to get your good luck. And with that, we have now made it to stop 2 of the day, which is Dali's Old Town. And The entire time I felt like I was out of some like storybook or Chinese drama that my parents would watch on the big screen growing up. The old town is nestled between the mountains and the lakes, so once again, so picturesque. It's full of cobblestone streets and the famous white-walled Bai style houses. Like I mentioned in my Kunming video, Yunnan province is known for having the largest amount of ethnic minorities in all of China, and the Bai ethnicity is one of those minorities. There are also a ton of cute little shops and cafes, so distracting the shopper in me wanted to go ham. It actually used to be the capital of ancient kingdoms, so once again, get that active imagination going, and I just got to pretend that I was like a queen walking through my streets. There's so much history here, but it also feels very walkable, and like they've updated certain parts to feel modern, so there's like a blend of the times. And of course, when I'm visiting somewhere like Dali, I've got to get souvenirs. So first on my list was something that I wasn't expecting, but Yunnan, for its produce and its climate, actually is a prominent grower of their own coffee. And as someone who is alarmingly caffeinated, this was a definite add to the checked-in bag. And I can feel my stomach grumbling already somehow. So we are off to our dinner spot. And you can see as we've exited out of Old Town, it quite immediately does look a bit different, but you'll see influences of that Bai style architecture throughout, like in the restaurant. And so in my first video in Kunming, I already had hot pot twice actually in a single day. And we are back to have hot pot again, but this is not like any other hot pot I've had in the States or probably other parts of China. We are doing a mushroom special. Y'all, I'm talking 15 types of local mushrooms, so local that we had to cook the mushrooms for 30 minutes, which really was a test of my patience, but we had to cook them down long enough to make sure all of their fungal, potentially LCD properties did not affect us. Apparently, if you don't cook it long enough, you actually might hallucinate. I didn't get to try it myself, but I had the rest of the China trip to enjoy, so hallucination over dinner in Dali was not on the agenda. And after smelling the broth for 30 minutes and my mouth truly watering, I was so ready to dig in. And it's interesting, I am definitely a mushroom gal, but I've never had so many varieties at once. And if you think the mushroom hot pot was the highlight, well, there were more. This fried rice with a black mushroom, more mushrooms of course, was delicious. And then we had a variety platter of bugs. Yeah. You know, it's not enough to just have one type of bugs. We got a whole set here. I will say the worms are actually quite delicious, but I could not bring myself to eat those grasshoppers. Like, their beady little eyes were staring at me, and I was anticipating the crunch, and that in itself made me feel a little uncomfortable. And with a very full belly, jiggling full of liquid and mushrooms, it was time to say goodnight to day one of Dali. Good morning, it's day 2 in Dali, and I don't know about you, but a hotel bed just makes me knock out and have some of the best sleep possible, so we woke up on that note. And of course, we are at a hotel, and a particularly beautiful one, which means we have to check out the complimentary hotel breakfast. And I kind of learned my lesson from the other days, and especially in Kunming, in that as much as I get excited by the all-you-can-eat buffet breakfast, I have to tame myself, knowing that there is so much good food that we're about to eat in the actual day. So I will say I went relatively conservative here. You can tell me if you agree. And I have to give a special shout out to the breakfast yogurt in China. In China, they like to eat their yogurt with a straw, essentially drinking it. I know it's not like rocket science, but there's something about adding a straw in there and making that part of the norm that makes it that much more enjoyable. Like, I finished way more yogurts because of it. And alrighty, at the top of our day, we are back in Old Town for day 2, starting off with some elder folk kind of doing some prayers and greeting. Apparently, because we were there during the end of May, it's the season where students are taking their entrance exams into high school and college, so a lot of their families will come and pray at the different temples, which I thought was very, very sweet. I'll give you some Chinese background as we walk through Old Town, but essentially in China, when you say take your college entrance exam, similar to that of like an SAT in the US, you are actually only allowed to take it one time. So there is so much pressure. And I believe that the tests are much longer and cover many more subjects. So there is like an insane amount of studying that these people have to do. And it's similar for if you're entering like high school or even middle school, I believe. So Those tests, big deal. The prayers are worth it. But okay. I was noticing many vendors hand making and freshly preparing these doughy buns, and I was very intrigued, so we had to get some. So essentially, they're like a fluffy scallion pancake, I'll call it. They technically have a savory version, which I'm holding here, as well as a sweet version, and of course, had to get both to try them. They actually were very delicious, for one, because they're a fluffy scallion pancake. How can you go wrong? But they also made me miss my grandmother, because growing up, my grandma would make scallion pancake fresh for me. So instantly I got hit with that. And then also being in China, of course, added to it all. So needless to say, these were particularly special bites considering how, and I'll also take this time to talk about the architecture in Dali. So as I mentioned, it is the Bai style, Bai as in the ethnic minority in this region. And it's very elegant and distinctive, but characterized by these whitewashed walls with this black detailing, which is unique and I'd never seen in another part of China. Wood is also a large element of their architectural style, specifically the doors and gates. You'll see a lot of carvings of flowers, birds, even different kinds of legends and stories. So I felt like every single shop, stall, house, I just wanted to stop and stare at and kind of like learn the whole story of the carvings. And yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. That is a coffee shop with an alpaca. It was really casually sitting there. I had a full-on reaction, but no one around me thought 2 cents about it. Apparently that's normal because there are alpacas in this region, but I think you'd probably find it kind of crazy in a very fun way like me. And at the end of the street in Old Town, we were met with this very expansive view of what is a rice paddy field. Of course, this was an extremely rainy day, hence all the umbrellas that you see people carrying around. So the rice paddy field was more like a flooded little mini pool of sorts, but you kind of get the gist. Like, just look out there, once again, use that active imagination, think of it as a sunny day, and you can imagine growing rice there. Back in the car we go, and about a 20-30 minute drive deeper inland away from the lake, and we are about to do an activity that I could only dream of. Our journey takes us through another village, and here you will see kind of the influence of these different nationalities and ethnic minorities, which is one of my favorite unique aspects to learn. I feel like other parts of China, not that they're homogenous, but I've been to cities like Beijing or Shanghai, and essentially they're all cities, and that's actually a good point. Like, I feel like China, especially in the US, is known for how modern and cutting edge it is, and there are so many parts that are, but then that definitely, in my opinion, in the West overlooks all these other amazing and very unique elements of China, like Yunnan. And another Dali bucket list item that you must experience is their traditional tie-dye, known as zharan. It's one of their most celebrated handicraft items and a true iconic part of that Bai culture that I was talking about. So they'll use traditional methods like folding, stitching, and binding cotton cloth before they then dip it into natural indigo dyes that are made out of leaves. And not only did we get to see some of this dye, we actually got to dye pieces ourselves in a pattern of our own choosing, and every piece is so unique, and we got to experience that. And not only is the workshop itself very interesting, you see the different pieces of cloth before they're dyed, and then all the different ways that they're able to add color. So it's not just the iconic blue that they have, but depending on different leaves or seeds or just natural items you use, you can create other colors like yellows and reds. And then the very kind lady showed us all the different kinds of patterns that you can make, and then it was time to choose which one that we wanted to include in our own bandana / little handkerchief that we were then making. My mom liked this pattern that had hearts all around, basically creating a symmetrical design where you fold it a bunch of times and then the shape gets imparted in multiple places. That's not the technical way to describe it, but that's how I'll describe it. But then she realized that you can have other shapes instead of the hearts. She wanted to do butterflies, which was very on brand for her. And then I was clearly feeling the chaos because when I saw the lady basically wrap a bunch of string around a water bottle, I was like, yep, that's for me. And ultimately, I felt like the pattern that she showed me that used that technique really evoked the ocean. And of course, you have the blue in there, and it made me think of ocean waves. And as a water gal, that was speaking to me. So that step was just prepping the cloths themselves, but of course we actually have to get the dye all up in there. So we strapped on some very long gloves to protect ourselves because this is dye after all, and it can get on your clothes. And then we went a-dunking. I think it was interesting to see that, where we're very active, it actually looks green, and that's because the dye are from leaves. And so when you first dunk, it'll come green, but the more that you soak it and the more that you dry it, it'll eventually become that blue color. And so while it took another 30 minutes or so for it to dry, that was a treat for me because it meant that we could look around this whole space. Essentially, it was a 4-walled little village, or family house, I'll call it. And this was beautiful. Once again, I felt like I was in some sort of Chinese drama or even like an anime of sorts. It's like this old style housing, and it was really beautiful to see the family that actually lives there, all the way from the current generation of a little like 5-year-old to a grandma that was there in her traditional Bai fashion, which was so beautiful. And it just kept getting unexpectedly better and better. They had 2 little pups and this like feisty but kind of sassy in the best way orange cat. Of course, all orange cats are sassy. And the time of the year was actually perfect because they were celebrating an upcoming festival and holiday. And basically you eat this very spiced paste, which is supposed to keep you extremely healthy. So when the matriarch grandma of the house offered me some, there was no way I was saying no. It was extremely spiced, like I said, but it did make me feel like my insides were fully cleaned out. And the time flew because before we know it, 30 minutes was up and we've got our new creations. How do you like it? Mine feels like a manta ray swimming through the ocean, and my mom's butterflies are so pretty. I love that activity. And with that, we are off to lunch for more Yunnan local specialties, this time specific to the Dali area. And this was really special because, once again, the restaurant interiors go hard in China. Like, it's insane that this is a full restaurant. It kind of feels like an entire palace that I got zapped back to in the olden times. And what was particularly special about coming into this was I noticed that at the moment we got here, my mom had like somewhat of an emotional reaction. And when I was talking to her about it, she was saying that this, I'll call it like a compound, or, the structure took her back to her own childhood when she was in China, in southern China specifically. And I guess she hadn't really thought about it in a while, but she was saying that this is probably what it looked like in the house that she grew up in when she was really, really young. And even talking about that now kind of makes me tear up because I feel like in the US, I don't get many opportunities to see what it was like for my parents and how they grew up as kids. I've just heard about it. So this was really, really meaningful. But okay, we are in for another feast of a lifetime. Every meal that we have truly is like a special feast with new dishes. So they have a local chicken here where we got to try the meat. Oh, and that dipping sauce, man, now that was good. And another specialty that they have here is raw pig's skin. Yup, you heard me right. I was very curious to try. I did try a tiny piece, and I gotta say, maybe because it's that dipping sauce, it was good. But after I ate it, my mom was like, okay, maybe don't eat another one just to be careful, because our stomachs definitely have not acclimated the way that people around here have, especially if they grew up eating this stuff. And we got to eat more leaves, this time tree leaves with scrambled eggs. Who knew scrambled eggs was my favorite way to combine flowers and leaves when eating? We also got to try this fish tofu stew with fish from the Lake, which is the main lake kind of at the center of this entire town. And just like that, we are back in the car to head to another area of Dali, specifically the Changshan mountain region. That is right, once again, by that Lake. Our itinerary today basically takes us all around Lake, that lake that I mentioned where we ate that fish from. And this is the main lake in Dali. And we're basically hitting each of the highlights around the perimeter of the lake, which includes this area that's got us walking up and down some stairs, you will see, but very much so worth it for the beautiful views. And as you can see, it was a rainy day, but it all just made it more romantic, including these dogs that were delivering roses. So romance was the name of the game. Definitely a very good date spot if I lived in China and I was looking for a boothang. Okay, but what a view. As we continue, like I said, Yunnan is known for all the local flowers and just the beautiful greenery. And so I was just stunned by these flowers as we walked along the path. And we're walking along, going over bridges, looking at lakes, and once again we find ourselves in another old town that kind of mimics the same vibe as the old town that we previously were in, a mix of the Bai style architecture with the white walls and gray and black paint, as well as a bunch of food vendors that were very, very tempting. And does anyone else have their heart kind of melt when they see older folks running food stalls? Like, I wish I could support all of them and buy all of their food, and I hope that they get to, enjoy their life. I don't know. Old people make me sentimental, what can I say? But they probably also make the best food. I also thought it was interesting that in Yunnan, they prefer silver jewelry that is part of their Bai culture from the ethnic minorities, as opposed to gold, which is preferred in a lot of other parts of China. And I didn't even know that there were parts of China that actually preferred silver. So that was interesting, and you can see it reflected in the vendors. And okay, next, probably not the best time to be filming, but then at the same time, I was like, how can I not film this? It was about to get treacherous, and I didn't know we were about to enter hard mode on our little walking. The rain, the umbrellas, made it even harder, but I feel like it made the view even more worth it as we were trekking up and down mountains through caves to get to our next spot. And oh man, was it worth it, because we are about to go to probably the most beautiful cafe that I have ever been to in my life. I'm still frazzled by traversing through the mountains, and then all of a sudden I get hit with this view as I walk through the door, and I'm like, where am I? We are in a literal mountain cafe. This used to be a hotel that was owned by a very famous performer from Yunnan, but then she turned it into what is a public cafe mixed with museum vibes. Truly the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and I could not stop taking videos, photos. I want this seared into my brain forever. They literally have different nooks and tables and chairs situated all throughout the mountain, and I feel like I was getting a masterclass in interior design. I personally love vintage Asian decor, so I was living for every single piece in this cafe, but then I was also a little bit nervous as I walked around to not bump anything. But as we put in our order, we of course had to walk around and see the whole thing. There are multiple floors, there's a portion outside, which definitely gave a different vibe because it was rainy. Of course, had to take photos, videos, even some are cringe. It's necessary. And I shouldn't have been surprised one bit that the food would be as aesthetic as the place itself. We got some cappuccinos, and they came with different desserts. The mountain dessert, not only was it very pleasing to look at, it was good, and that is chocolate dirt crumble. Very nicely done. Okay, so we didn't even get to look at the whole thing, so of course we had to do a second photo session for each of the little suites and see what highlights they had. One of the rooms had a literal cave on the second floor. What the heck? So even though this is a public space, like I mentioned, I will say you do need to reserve tickets beforehand. So if you are coming to the beautiful Dali, this is a must visit on your list. I would have never expected it, but I also have never been to anything like it. And they practically had to drag me out of there. I did not want to leave, but I will never forget it. And as we're heading out of the town, we make our way and continue along. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but we are headed to our final dinner, not only in Dali, but our final dinner in this week adventure in China. And like I said, somehow the restaurants, all of them feel like they are literal movie sets. They are beautiful, they are spacious, and of course, as it is the final dinner, you gotta celebrate with some aged wine. They had their own version of a Chinese whiskey. I am not a drinker by any means, but if they tell me to drink this Chinese liquor, I will volunteer, but granted it was very strong, so I only had a few sips because I was not about to get wasted in China. And of course, our feast is the proper word for it, covered so many local Dali specialties, from pork and pig to flowers, different leaves on trees, to ham hock, to dried ginger and lotus roots. And of course, somehow I found myself eating hot pot again. What is this, the fourth time in 5 days? Once again, can't complain. I've always said hot pot is my favorite food, and I never got to live it out of eating it multiple times back to back to back. And if I'm gonna live out that dream, of course, it's gotta be in China. And I will end off my China journey through Kunming and Dali in the Yunnan province by saying a huge thank you, well, of course, to my mom who brought me along for this journey, but also for the individuals who were like hosting us and showing us around. I don't think that they will ever watch this video. I can confirm YouTube is not available in China. I did try to access it. Man, they really showed me a side of China that I could never imagine and brought me to so many places that I probably would not have been able to find on my own. And I feel like I have to say thank you to China. Like, thank you for being so beautiful and showing me a part of yourself that is not properly represented in the US. And by me making this video, I hope to show everyone that China is such a beautiful place and that you've got to go visit, because I for sure will be back. See you next time, China.